Hi, I'm Marc Sumner, CEO and founder of Robertson Sumner. Welcome to the Channel Chat podcast, where we will share learnings, best practices and failures with some of the biggest names in the IT industry, all with the simple aim of being the go-to place for IT sales professionals and managers to learn from others with the ultimate goal of maximising performance and growing the channel. Hello, Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast, and I have the pleasure of introducing today's CRM judge and sales expert for the channel, Paul Lloyd. How are we doing, Paul?
Good, thank you. Good to be here.
Good, thanks very much for coming in. So, Paul, one of the questions that we was key to be asking yourself is why people in the channel aren't treating sales professionals as professionals. Why aren't we actually treating that actually as an industry that we should be actually investing in?
I don't think it's just the IT channel, in fairness. I think in the UK, in the broadest sense of the word, sales is the job that you get when you can't get a proper job. So all too often there's this notion that people fall into sales, and as a consequence it's just treated with contempt, as opposed to being the fourth or fifth profession.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that people treat us?
I think
what if people fall into it and think it's
all
not
too often it's portrayed as some sort of dark art, when in actual fact it's nothing more complicated than a process and personality and knowing how to sort of present a deal and negotiate. But there's very little training, so all too often people take people on, give them a desk, give them a chair and tell them to go out and bring us some business without any guidance or telling them really how to do it or what to do or anything like that. And that then creates the wrong impression, because we all get cold calls from people that don't know what they're talking about and emails from people that don't know what we're talking about, and certainly people outside of the selling profession, they get the wrong end of the stick to some extent. But I think we need to train more, we need to be supported more, and a bit like the US, I think salespeople should be treated a bit more with a bit more reverence.
Yes, that barbershop mentality. Why do you think, especially in for the resellers, I find they do that a lot. Why do you think they just give someone a desk and say get on with it? Why is that?
It's cheap.
It's cheap.
I mean, at the end of the day, they can give them a chair. There's a phone. There's a desk, and no training, no investment, no nothing, and then they pay them a commission on what they bring in. But it doesn't build a company. I think where that whole mentality falls down, and the reason that perhaps we've got lots and lots of mid-sized companies that do that, is it doesn't build a company, because, as we were talking about previously, I mean, when you start looking at this whole concept of salespeople moving with a book of business, then if they're moving around and just simply processing their existing customers through a different company, there is no company loyalty, there's no company brand. And if you look at the successful organisations, I mean, my background was with SCC. We built a company. Computer Centre have built a company by taking people, telling them what they want, explaining where to go, who the clients are, and so on. Softcat, they've built a company. It's not a group, a collection of not like-minded individuals.
So how do they do that? Obviously, you work for SCC and you've seen the rise of Computer Centre and Softcat. How do you think they actually go about building a company, whereas people are just getting people in and just asking them to sell?
I think what they do, they have a clear strategy. So when I was at SCC, which was a while ago now, but we sold to, at the time, the Times Top 1000. So our target market was the Times Top 1000 accounts. And what we did was we sold market-leading product into the Times Top 1000. What do SCC do? We sell market-leading product into the Times Top 1000. Computer Centre, pretty similar, but same sort of size. Softcat, as they've come through, it's been SME. So they sell to the SME market space, market-leading products and so on. So we know what we do, we know who our target market is, and then we take people on with the brief and the explanation that we're selling these products and services to this market. Now, when I started with SCC, I had 12 target accounts. That was it.
Only 12?
12. My job was to sell stuff to those 12. And when I'd taken 11 no's, I got a problem. So I go back to the first one.
And is that cycle? You had to keep on going around those.
Well, yeah.
You couldn't call outside those 12.
Right. So
That was a short day.
but what it meant you had to do is you had to do. I mean, the thing that amuses me, and I spend most of my life at the moment explaining this to people, but I had to understand the company, where they were. I had to look in. In the old days, it was newspapers and computer users yearbook, which I've been looking for a copy of, but I can't find a copy. But now the computer users yearbook would tell you what the companies use, what technology they used. So you'd buy that book and you'd have to sit down and do the research so you understood. Now today, I can do in 10 minutes what it would have taken me hours to do then, because I can do it on LinkedIn and I can do it with Google and all these things. And so to build a picture of and then look for gaps where I might be able to help. And it may have been a day's training. It may have been £1 million worth of laptops. I think at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're finding the right person, you're building a relationship, and you're looking for opportunities. And so, I worked with my 12. We all had 12, and some of us were more successful than others.
And you couldn't.
It wasn't absolute, but that was the guide. And so whenever I had a review, it was on those 12 accounts. Where are we? What are we doing? Have we spoke to IBM? Have we spoke to Compaq? Have we spoke to whoever else is supplying them? What's the relationship? Who do they deal with? Where's the chink? Because it's an exception, isn't it? We get in on an exception basis. So what we're looking for is an exception.
You mentioned earlier about book of business. So when we get resellers come to us, they're always saying to us, have they got a book of business, Mark? Can they transition their book, etc.? Because we're looking for new customer acquisition and we need new customers from them. What's your thoughts on that? The candidate has to have a book of business to bring over from another company.
I think the difficulty is if they can bring it to you, they can take it from you. So you're not building a company. And it's a cheap way of doing it. So when it comes down to it, if we can pull somebody in that was going to do some business for us in a short period of time, that's great. Whippy, we're going to have some business in the next 2 or 3 months. 6 months down the track, if you upset them, they go away with it. Much better in my mind that the company has the reputation and understanding, and people come in and you go through your story and how you position it, and they go out and win business for you, because then it stays with you when they decide to move on.
How does it stay with you? Because doesn't the salesperson then take that customer?
Not if they've done their job properly. I mean, if you're working, and certainly these days, so we're moving to a subscription economy, and almost everything that we do in the IT field is monthly recurring revenue or monthly subscription. Once that's in place, it's a lot more difficult for and other salespeople to take that with them, because all of those contracts are with the company that's left behind. With SCC, we used to get people to sell services and support contracts and outsourcing. And once you've got that entrenched in the business, then it's again far more difficult for somebody to take it with them. But also we would team sell. So as the sales director, I would visit the major accounts. I'd be involved in all the major deals. So I don't go, bring me your book of business, there's a desk, go over there, you crack on, just send me the margin and I'll pay you a bit of commission every month. This was, come in, this is who we want you to sell to, this is how we do it. I'll come out with you. The great Mr. Rigby used to go out and do his appointments as well, because it's a part of the company. The culture was, we sell as a team, we work as a team, and we have multi-points of contact.
So why do you think so many resellers, and we talked about earlier, 10,000 resellers under 10 million. So if we take the top 250 VARs in the UK, after that there's thousands of them under 10 million. Why don't they adopt that sort of strategy where it's either team-based selling or moving to services? Why do they just still look for, can you bring me some of the book and then just give them a barber chair?
They ain't got any money, have they? I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, they live month to month, hand to mouth. Now, if you're going to invest in a sales team properly and bring people in and train them, it takes time, and give them time to come up to speed, it takes time, and that costs money. And if they haven't got the money to actually invest and do it properly, then why not do it short circuit? But you're always in an up and down. You get a good guy comes in, he does you £1 million this year, and he buggers off and does £2 million for somebody else next year because they've bought him a new car or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
I think it's a
And
long.
that happens all the time.
Well, of course it does.
It happens all the time. Yeah, not if that's a new car, but yeah, whatever it is, new commission structure, or they give him a bit more basic, and he's taking his.
And one of the issues. I mean, I've got a client, as you know, at the moment, in the five. Was he? I'd say he's on 10 million this last year. 30 years in business, traditional reseller, and his margins are tight. He's working very hard. Clash of culture in some respects, which is great in terms of us working together, because my view is you nurture people, you build them, you build it out on the business. His view has been, let's bring people in with a book of business. But what we found is that the commission plans of a lot of these mid-tier players have changed dramatically. So whereas maybe 12 months ago they're paying 20 and 25% commission on margin, now there's a very high gate to get through before you get that, or they've just reduced it. And of course, as soon as they do that, people start looking elsewhere. So, I've had my commission reduced. What will you do? I'll bring my business with me. Yeah. So,
3 reasons normally why salespeople will look for a job: commission structure change, they fall out of their manager, or they relocate. If one of those reasons happens, someone good will come to the market.
Well, they're all changing. I mean, in the last 6 months, I say all. I mean, there's a lot of the, you call them mid-tier, around that kind of 10, 15 million type organisation who have changed commission plans because they just cannot afford to pay the salespeople what they have done. And of course, on top of that, from the sales perspective, there's a lot of people moving to the SaaS model and they don't really know how to pay salespeople for it. So, there's a certain amount of movement there. But do you want it? It's not something that's ever sat comfortably with me, and I've headhunted and taken people out of competitors and things, but I think they need to do it your way in your business, whatever that is, right or wrong to some extent. But if I'm going to take somebody on, I don't want them telling me how my business has to run so that they can do their business. They have to do the business the way that the company wants to do business.
And that's the best way, in your opinion, to grow the company.
That's how you grow the business, because then, if they do leave, their business stays behind. You look after it, you're constantly adding new accounts and you're servicing your accounts properly and moving forwards. If you're just transacting, obviously it's a bit easier if they want to move. But if you're just selling boxes, why wouldn't they buy them over the internet?
What's your opinion on new customer acquisition? So all resellers in the country, even the top ones, Softcat, what's their strategy? Win more customers and sell more to existing customers. What would you give advice to people who are in that sort of under £10 million market? They don't want to really invest in salespeople, but they do want to win new customers. What advice would you give them?
I think the difficulty is that they can't do it without investing to start with. So. And
there's no point even planning to get new customers if they're not going to prepare to invest.
No, because it takes time. And I work with a number of small MSPs, owner-only sellers, and I act as a sort of coach and mentor for them while they're actually out selling. It's all about finding the right people. So who do you want to sell to? Now, as I say, when I started, I had 12. I think in this day and age, your average channel salesperson can probably have 300 target accounts, and with a small MSP it may be 300 target accounts for the company, but there's 300 accounts that we know. So we sell to 25 to 50 seat organisations, 300 accounts, 25 to 50 seats. So we know who they are. We can then do the research on Google, LinkedIn, website. We can find out who the players are. We know what sort of a business they are. We can establish all of that. Just takes time, there's a fair bit of effort, and then go out and engage with them. Now that may be telephone, God forbid we make a cold call. It may be a cold email, it may be on LinkedIn, it may be strategically appearing where they go into their networking groups, all of the above, but to engage with them, to meet them and start to build a relationship to be able to sell them something. But it's not a 5-minute job. The biggest challenge at the bottom end of it is that the small MSPs, I don't believe, understand the gravity of the decision that they're asking the small business person to make when it comes to saying, we'll do all your support. Because what they're saying is, we'll look after your heart and the lifeblood of your business. You just carry on. And they think, I'm a nice bloke. I can walk in an office and go, we're really good at this. And we've got all these wonderful tools that help us do it. So why don't you give us your support? Why would they? I mean, sometimes you go, why would they? I mean, if I walked in here with you, right, so your business here, you know, if your IT went down today, you can't trade.
No.
If you've got IP phones, it'll take your phones out as well. So if you, yeah, so today you've got however many people sitting out there. If your system goes down, you can't trade. So I walk in and I say, why don't you let me look after it for you? Unless you know me, trust me, like me, have some evidence that I can actually do the job, you're not going to do it, because that's from your perspective, it's a business defining decision. And they, you know, the smaller organisations, they don't understand that. They just think it's, you know, simple and straightforward.
Why do then companies of that size typically get complete newbies to go and do the hardest bit of the job? So newbies go in, right, you're going to go and sell new business, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know who you're talking to, you don't know what you're actually selling, but they're expecting them to go and get new business. Hardest job in the world must be now to do that.
Well, they don't do it. I mean, they take them on, they pay them 30, 40 grand a year. After 3 months, they sack them because they haven't done anything. You know, I do a workshop, which I do, you know, largely with the smaller ones, because most of my clients are the smaller businesses. And I sat down with a guy, and his target for his salesman was 25-seat support contract a month. And I went, what? He went, 120. I said, so simplistically, he wins 1 in 4. So every month he's got to have 4 at the bottom end of the sales process, which means he's got to have 8. And we worked it out. He needed roughly 24 per month. Now, obviously, the numbers vary wherever you go, but I mean, simplistically, 24 a month to be able to produce that. So I say, can you produce him 24 leads a month? Well, of course I can't. How's he going to do it then? No. But that's what we need him to do. But that has to translate into what is practical to do.
Yeah. What's realistic? What's possible? You know, who else is doing that?
But it just seems that, again, it comes back to this. You know, sales is the job you do when you can't get a proper job. You know, we just lump it on, and if they don't do it, we'll sack them. Take some on. If they don't do it, we'll just sack them. Get another one.
What's your view on sales now, new business methods and old business methods? So you mentioned cold calling earlier. You mentioned about the dying art of cold calling, cold emails. All now new methods like Sales Navigator via LinkedIn and social selling. That doesn't seem very social because you don't meet anyone. What's your view on that and how it should be approached?
I genuinely don't believe that it's any different today than it was when I did it a long time ago. Yeah? When I had my 12 target accounts, I needed to find out who the senior people were. I needed to find out what they did. I needed to find out the business. I needed to find out what kit they use and research. And then I had to find a way of going and talking to them. In the complex sales arena, so you know, if you're flogging boxes, it's slightly different, but that's the same. The tools are different. So I would go in on a Monday morning with a copy of the business section from the Sunday Times, and I'd go through it and I'd cut sections out and I'd send it to, so if you're a prospect, I'd clip it on a compliment slip. For those of people who don't know what a compliment slip is, you know, find out. I'd clip it on a compliment slip, I'd send it to you, and then I'd ring you 2 days later. I sent you this article from the Times, is that something that interests you? You'd either talk to me or you wouldn't, but I've done something. I'd send you letters, because we used to do that. But you know, the engagement piece and the getting to see you, the process and the requirement to do that is exactly the same. But now, I would do it with LinkedIn, and I'd do it with Twitter less so, but
white papers or whatever it could be.
White papers, it could be, you know, I mean,
webinars.
It could be. I mean, I got my first client as a, you know, doing what I'm doing from wishing him happy birthday on LinkedIn.
Really?
I sat at the side of him at a dinner, and we had a chat, and he told me what he was doing and whatever. And he's only, you know, relatively small business. His closing shot to me was, well, you know, we'd really like to work with you, but I'm sure we can't afford you. And that was the end of that. I then connected with him on LinkedIn. About 6 or 8 weeks later, it just came up that it was his birthday. So I sent him a note and it said, happy birthday. Hope things are going well, you know, following our conversation or something. he then came back to me and said, "No, thanks for that. Might be worth having a chat."
Conversation starts.
That's it. I don't do it with everybody I'm connected to, but I regularly do happy birthday workout, because what you're looking for is front of mind. You want the people that you want to sell to, you need to be at the front of their mind. So in the old days, I clipped newspapers, I sent it to you. Today, I'd share articles with you on LinkedIn. I may look at your posts and, because I'm slightly arrogant, send you a bit of advice on maybe how to do it a bit better. But all I'm doing is constantly nurturing you until there's something and you go, hang on, this guy did whatever.
Do you think those conversation starters, as you said, either nowadays sending articles or now sending white papers, etc. Do you think businesses should be targeting people on that now? Because it's still a lot of on how many calls, what out call rates, activity, etc. People aren't really targeting people and actually getting conversations going via LinkedIn or.
I think the difficulty now is, and I've come round to I suppose in some respects come round to a slightly different way of looking at it, in that I think it should be on outcomes. So I don't think any longer that major 100 phone calls a day and all that sort of business is particularly relevant. What should be is your outcome is that you arrange 10 appointments next month. How you do that is entirely up to you within the guidelines, but fundamentally, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's on Instagram, however it happens to be, if I need you to sell to Jaguar Cars, then you've got to get to the IT director of Jaguar Cars. Now, how you do that, as long as it's legal and honest, I think that's more important than, you must do 100 calls a day, or you must have 30 conversations a day, or whatever it happens to be. Because some of it, that nurturing process may just be tracking people through social media, making comments on their content, sort of touching them along the way. And only recently did I really understand how much time that takes, because I've tended to do it forever, kind of as a part of my daily life. You don't really appreciate how much time and effort's involved in doing that nurturing piece. And because I've been working with owner-only sellers, and I'm going, you need to do this, but that might be an hour and a half a day, which they haven't got time for, and they haven't got the money to pay somebody necessarily to do it. So there's a bit for them. They've got a challenge there. But I think in the bigger partners and things, it's about target accounts, essentially knowing who you want to sell to, teeing that up with the salespeople, and then managing them onto that. And that could be networking events. Never been a big fan of networking events. I'm not really a big fan of networking events, but I do a lot of them because I want to be seen in all the places where prospects are. And I had a guy contact me this week because he's seen me at an event 2 months ago, and he told me 18 months ago that he'd gone with somebody else. But it was, saw you at the event, give us a shout, let's get together and see what's going on. So all the time, your personal brand or the company brand, but it's time and effort. Why wouldn't your sales? If you're going to moan at your salespeople for not coming in at 9 o'clock in the morning, they're not going to go to a networking event till 10 o'clock the night before. No. Most of them, the good ones will. The top performers will be at the networking event. They'll be in the office at 9. They'll be doing everything. They'll be working weekends, and they'll be doing evenings, doing proposals and all that sort of business, because that's what they do. But all of the various. For me, it's relatively straightforward because the industry I grow up in is my target accounts largely. So I can go to lots of events and I get seen, and sometimes I think, I don't want to do that again, but you go along and nod to people and acknowledge people and leave. But it's all mind share, and it doesn't matter what you're selling, you've just got to be in the right place where those people are.
So you said earlier about managing outcomes. If you were managing a sales team now, or advising someone to manage a sales team now, would you, and you said about maybe 10 appointments per month, would you let that salesperson have the autonomy to do it themselves, or would you manage them in a certain way to do it? I think this is how you should be getting those appointments.
I think you would train them how to do it. You will train them on the nurturing techniques and how to get there, and you would want to monitor what's going. There's a fine balance between monitoring and micromanaging, I guess. But I think what you've got to do is you've got to give them the the space to be able to do it. But I would always sit down at least once a week to do a review, and if they're not getting the appointments, then why aren't they? And then look at ways of improving that. So, to start with, you're training them, you're watching them, give them a bit of space, and if they can get on and do it. But of course, you're there all the time to help them, aren't you? So, you've only done 8 this month. Why not? And now it could be that they've been playing golf or whatever. So, we can stop that. It may be that they're just not sure of something, or they need a bit of help, or they might they've got a networking event coming up and they'd like you to go with them just to give them a bit of confidence or a bit of weight. In my case, it's usually weight, but so you've got this. But I don't think nailing them to the old kind of the 1950s, you've got to make 100 calls a day, makes any sense any longer.
Why do you think the companies still do that though?
Because they don't know any different. Because
they're just not educated and know any different.
Well, they do the same things that they've always done. I sit and say I don't think much has changed, which is always sort of leading with your chin. But the process hasn't changed. The nurturing, finding prospects, engaging with them, nurturing them, finding an opportunity and taking that through stages to an order is the same as it's been forever. How you do it has changed. So I would do a mail shot of 1. So there was Perkins Engines was an account that was one of my targets, and I could never get through to the guy. So I actually designed a mail shot that looked like it had gone to everybody. I only sent 1, and that was to him, because I knew exactly what he was interested in. And then I'd phone him up, and I phoned him up, and he wasn't in the office because his wife was having a baby, and he had a daughter, and they told me that on the phone. So a couple of weeks later, I rang up, and I got through to him, and the first thing he says, "How's your baby?" And all the rest of the issues disappeared, and he wants to talk about his baby. I can do that today, can't I? I mean, the beauty is now I don't even have to talk to them sometimes, because I can send them a message on LinkedIn and congratulations on this, congratulations on that. I can do it publicly or I can do it privately. The process hasn't changed. The tools that you use to do it have. I can follow you on Twitter. I can see what you're interested in. I can intervene on Twitter in terms of the things that you do. I can phone you and say I saw your Twitter message, and but you've got to be trained in it. I had been approached recently by a company that does graduate recruitment, and I got to be careful I don't name her, but I got approached on LinkedIn, and it was an in-mail, and it was absolutely textbook in terms of showed an interest, looked at my profile, saw that I was relevant. The actual message that I got was crafted in terms of my interests and everything else, and because this is what I do, I was actually quite impressed by this, so I kind of responded, and I wrote an article on my profile about my son getting a job through LinkedIn. So she came back to me with, thank you very much, and we connected, and then it was, which recruiter did your son use to get a job? And I looked at it and I thought, which recruiter? And then it occurred to me that I'd written this article. So she's actually read the article that I've written, and we ended up talking. And as it was, it didn't. At the moment, it hasn't come to anything. Although I got an email offer 2 days ago, or an in-mail offer 2 days ago, saying, "Have you got many prospects yet?" Because we've got that sort of thing now that she can do that. Now, she's been trained to do it and do it very well, and that's obviously how they get. That's how they get their business. That training could be done with anybody.
Yeah.
And that's more effective in that context than her phoning me, because although I try and take most cold calls because I feel a little bit of sympathy with them in some respects, I haven't got a lot of time to do that.
So the process is the same, but the tools have changed. That's basically what we're saying. Because the tools have changed, do you think it's now harder to get through to people, or harder to get those conversation starters, or do you think it's the job's now easier because of these tools?
I think it's easier. I know, but I don't know because I haven't done it, but I know your marital status. I know if you've got any kids. I know as much about you personally as I want to know. I know how long you've been here. I know what's gone on here. I can look at the company records. I can see how the business has grown. I can do all of that within 15 minutes. Yeah. You know, I subscribe to one of the the company checkers. So for the one I can do it while I'm talking to you if I need to. So I can see what success you've had in your business, when you've had good times and bad times. I can see how long you've been here, what you do, what you're interested in. All I need is that opportunity to have that first conversation, and that may well be saw this thought of you.
Yeah.
Now that could be a share on any one of them. It could be any sort of way of getting there to get that first conversation. Once you get that first conversation, to some extent you're on your own, but you've got all that backup information. So when I talk to you, I know that you've been in business for however long it is.
Yeah,
but,
20 years, yeah.
Yeah, so, but that all those sorts of things. I know where you've worked before. So, if you've worked somewhere where I know somebody that's worked before, I've got an opportunity to just talk about it.
Because that information is so accessible now. What do you think about, once I've got all that information, so I know where they work, I know what they like, I know their hobbies, I know what they're interested in, etc., Twitter, all that sort of stuff, but getting through to them. Before, people could get cold called and actually normally get through to them. Now, if I try to cold call an MD, probably not going to get through to him. So would you say it's better to have engagement via social selling?
Yeah,
or would you still advise to people, say, well, look, you still got to get them on the phone at some point.
I think
try and cold call them.
You would try and build a relationship via the social tools. And I mean, you are all over it, so the sort of the MDs that you would want to speak to will have seen you, but you've got to have seen look at their profiles and see what they're interested in. Now, if recruitment is an issue for them, which many of them will have put something, or they've got their HR department, or you've got sort of follow it down, then you've got something. You've just got to get something that's of interest, and sometimes it's a phone call. I know you don't like taking calls, but sometimes it's an email. I do an email shot, not very often, in fairness, but the message has to be resonate with them. So mine says, "Are you running the Salesforce by accident? Are you doing it because nobody else will do it?" And that's a real issue that a lot of these smaller businesses have got, because they're techies and they've grown up with the businesses and they haven't got that. But that sentence, I get 2 or 3 inquiries every single time I do it. They don't all go anywhere, but it's a constant theme. With any of the resellers, they've got to have something different to say and just demonstrate that they understand their market. But if it was easy, we wouldn't earn as much money, and everybody would be doing it, wouldn't they? But it's not. It's easier because you've got so much information available to you. I mean, if you're selling, I know a guy that sells support services through MSPs. I mean, he can get the accounts of an MSP. He can look at what they do. He can look at his services, and he can write to them and say, "If you'd used me last year, you'd have saved £150,000. Would you like to talk about it?" Who's not going to?
So it's basically using all the tools available, getting as much information about it, and then striking with the conversation.
Yeah. And then, and it may be that you sit down. I mean, I would be sitting down with the salespeople, and right. So where do we, how do we put this together? Where is the chink in this? Where's the exception? Because it's all about exception. And there'll come a time when, who their suppliers are. One of their suppliers will have a hiccup, and you can go, Computer Centre are going out of business, so why don't you come and talk to me? Or not. But it's an exception thing. That's all it is. I mean, I often say this, but last year O2 had an outage for a day. So the O2 network was down for a day. I've been an O2 customer for 15 years, probably. If you phoned me any day in that 15 years, I'm not interested, because you're all much of a muchness and it's all about the same, so I don't want to have a conversation. If you'd have phoned me the day after that outage, I would have talked to you. Now, it might not have gone anywhere, but I would have engaged with you, because I've had no service for 24 hours. And, I'm in a position where I may well want to review it.
Yeah, I'm open to. Yeah, I've had a problem.
Yeah. But that's it. And they're all having problems. They're all having problems all of the time. So it's just finding the right one and doing the research and having the intellect to be able to establish which one it is.
Okay, so let's move it on. So last month there was an article come out in CRN about Softcat. They've gone through the £1 billion mark, and Graham Watt had said it's the best time he's ever seen in the channel.
He's got the best job in the world.
Yeah, because they're a company most researchers would admire. So what's your view on the channel at the moment? Do you think it is the best time in the channel to be in it?
I think if you're in a well-funded company that knows where they're going, there's no lack of opportunities. And what Softcat do very, very well is sell things. They're a selling machine. They take on graduates, they train them well, they put them on the phone, they work with them, they build them, and they do business for them. And they add 100 a year. They got 600 and odd salespeople. What's phenomenal, as we said earlier,
because they were what you said, they were 60 million in 2008. So
so in 2008 they turned over 60 million. Because as I said, I went and met Martin not long after he'd gone. Martin Halliwell, not long after he'd gone to work there, and there was 60 million. And what they did 1.2 billion, I think, this last year. Yeah. But it's not rocket science. They understand who they are. They understand what their strengths are. They understand the market that they're selling to. They've got a good, solid story within that. They train their salespeople to tell the story to their market, and they're there all the time. There's perception in the market that they're always the cheapest, but they're not always the cheapest. They're just always everywhere. So if you're there early on in a deal, statistically, 70% of the deals go to the people who are there first. So if they're there all the time and they're talking to the people all the time and building those relationships all the time, when something happens, they're always there, aren't they?
And they've got enough foot soldiers to do it.
Well, they've got masses of them, herds.
So let's have some sort of quick fire questions about your background. So, what would you say is the best manager you've ever worked with over your 30 years span?
I'd have to say, the best guy that I worked for was Peter Rigby. Right, and there are people that will see this and go, but he was honest, he was a gentleman, he was straightforward, and he knew exactly what he wanted. And as a consequence, you knew exactly what you were doing, exactly how you were doing it, and you just went off and did it. And he was always there to support you doing it. And I learnt a lot from him, although having said that, my respect for him has grown since we parted company a lot more than it did when I was there, because inevitably I'm arrogant and he was arrogant and we banged heads quite often. But no, he was very clear, very plain. He knew what he wanted to do and he went out and he did it. And that's the bit I think that by and large is missing. He had a single focus in terms of what he did until he'd got the money, and now it's all over the place. He's got airports and all sorts. But he'd done it before. He was a natural salesman in some respects, and I assumed when I left there that everywhere else was the same, and I was sadly wrong. I can't give you a list of the worst managers I've had since then. Not whilst it's being recorded.
Not recorded, no. What would you, if there's anything, what was the one thing you'd change about our industry, if anything?
I think the way that vendors support resellers. Again, if you go right back to the early days, if you were an early IBM reseller, IBM trained you, you went through the IBM sales school, they'd help your FD. I mean, they actually got involved with the companies that were selling on their behalf. Today, I think most vendors treat the channel with contempt.
Why is that, do you think? Why
well, because they don't understand it. I got thrown out of an event 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Really?
Right. So there's an event called something marketing. I should know that. But essentially, it's an event that's run for vendor marketers. Right. So in the room, there were 105 vendor marketing people who sell to the channel. Channel insight might be. And I'd been invited to the previous one and told I couldn't go because I'm so important and have such far reach that I would damage their sponsors. So, me, on my own. And I sort of comes up again, and I registered, and I wasn't told I couldn't go, so I turned up on the day. So I get in there, and I'm on a table of 10 people. Very well organised event, I have to say that. 100 and odd vendor marketer people who are selling through the channel. And on the table I'm sitting at, there were 5 or 6 vendors who, as soon as I said I'd worked in the channel, I was kind of 4 foot off the ground, because now there was nobody in the room. Very few, let's not say nobody because we can argue it. Very few people in that room had ever had any experience of working in the channel. So you've got vendors selling products to vendors to sell to the channel with if there was half a dozen, 2 or 3 of them I knew, right? They hadn't got any experience, and they're all talking to each other because they all know, they're all experts. And I sit there going, well, of course it's not going to work, and they don't understand, and they want it done cheap, and they're doing most of them Americans, so once they've IPO'd, they've got a drive for numbers, and they don't care. They just want numbers. I think the sort of reseller schemes and partnership schemes are at best average. I don't know of any that are particularly good. And the one thing that happened whilst I was in the channel, literally doing the job, which I think is a major issue, although lots of resellers like it, is deal reg. I think deal registration should be abolished because it takes away the choice from the end user as to where they buy things from.
And explain a deal reg.
So essentially, if I find a prospect and I would register that prospect with the vendor so that I get typically I get an extra discount, I get a special price for that specific prospect, and that's then protected. So anybody else that gets involved doesn't, again, typically get that price. So I've got a price advantage. But what happens is the big vendors, the big resellers, have got people that just simply register deals. So they'll be phoning round and they'll find somebody who's interested and they'll register it, and then they get price protection and all the extras. And I just think it's wrong.
As a customer, that's no good.
Well,
is it?
but this is it, and I'm because I tend to be slightly belligerent from time to time. When I did it, I would tell the end user, I can't give you this price because the vendor's registered it with somebody else. If you tell them that you want to deal with me, then we can make it work. But all too often, it's registered. Now, the lazy, not so very good salespeople, resellers like it because it gives them a price advantage, and if they get there first and they get it registered properly, then they're going to win it 9 times out of 10 because they've got a price.
Who shouts loudest shouts first.
But in terms of making the market work properly and and the vendors don't get the one thing that the vendors get out of it. And when I was at ClearSwift, the guy that I worked for, his primary reason for wanting it was so he gets a forecast. So you declare. Essentially what you're doing is you're declaring to the vendor the opportunities that you've got, so they've got something of visibility and they've got a forecast. But all of your deals then are in the vendor. And I did actually have an instance where it was with HP, where all of our deals were registered with HP for price this, price that, price something else, and I was assured that nobody else would see them, and then their leasing sales guy starts phoning the salespeople of the deals that are registered, so he can see that the deals are registered. So he's gone to the salespeople, and he sent a list of all of our registered deals to the sales team individually, and see if he can help them. These are the deals you've got registered. Right, all of the deals for the company to each of the individual salespeople. Can we help you with them? And that security piece there is an issue for me, because if I'm telling a vendor all the deals I've got on, I don't know if one of their salespeople decide to leave and join a competitor, they've got all that information, notwithstanding the fact that it makes the market unfair.
So going back to with that conference, then why did you get sort of thrown out then? Because they came on the table and thought you were too.
So what happened was, I get in there. So I wasn't refused. My registration was taken. I turned up on the day. I got a badge. I go and sit down, and then the organizer, I won't tell you who it is. The organizer at the end of the first session tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Can I have a word?" And she's a young lady who's about that big. And so we went out the room, and she said, "I've been emailing you to tell you that you couldn't come." Well, Adam. I mean, I'm not. No. I do a lot of vendor events, and if I've been refused entry twice, and she's half of that. And I said, "Well, obviously, I've not had that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But I'm adding value as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm interested to know. For me, it's a fact-finding exercise. They're not my prospects. Vendors are not typically my prospects. But it's useful to know what they're doing with regards to the channel." And she said, "Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave."
What? Nuts.
And I went, "I'm sorry?" She said, "Well, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." And, you respect it, don't you? I mean, so I went in and I said to the people on my table, "I'm really sorry, but I've been asked to leave." and they all went, "There's my business card. Can you give me a call?" And I sat in reception, and there was a couple of people that I knew that were in the event anyway. And one of them came out and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I've been asked to leave, but I'd just sit." He was at the running meet, so I was sitting in reception, interview city.
Yeah.
And he said, "If I was you, I'd social media the hell out of it." So I actually put a thing on LinkedIn. I've just been paid the greatest compliment I ever have. I've got a room full of major American vendors, and I've been thrown out because I might be a threat to their business.
Oh dear. Two last questions I've got for you, Paul. One is, if you were a newbie or a graduate or a newbie and trying to get into the industry, what part of the channel would you go in? Would you go for a vendor MSP, try and get to vendor land, or
when my daughter asked me, right? So the hardest thing I've ever done as a parent, and I don't suppose you're there yet, but the hardest thing as a parent is when they say to you, "What do you think we should do when we leave school?" Because the only thing you know is what you've done. Yeah. And my daughter went to uni, came out, she worked for the IT job board for a couple of years, went travelling, came back, and she's sitting in a bedroom when she came back from travelling with a £10,000 overdraft and a student loan, and said, "I want to look at IT sales." And I said, "Go and work for a vendor. Go and work for a brand first." So
HP, Cisco, Oracle.
Yeah, I mean, she went to Rackspace. So she went to Rackspace. She worked at Rackspace for 3 or 4 years, and she joined Salesforce 18 months ago.
Wow, fantastic.
Now, the reason for that is that it doesn't matter what happens now, she will always get a job. My background, I mean, I've got, in terms of what I did at SEC and the like, is quite impressive, but they're not brands and vendors, and as a consequence it means that when you go elsewhere it's more difficult. Right. If I'd have worked for IBM for 12 months, I'd have got a job every year, because as soon as people see IBM on your CV, and so Softcat wouldn't necessarily want to hear this, but I mean, when it comes down to it, I think get into a vendor, get on a vendor training scheme. There aren't many of them, unfortunately, but whether it's Salesforce or Cisco or the brands that are there, and there's
the tier ones.
Yeah, and there are some up and coming. I mean, there's a lot of SaaS companies up and coming that you can get involved in, and get that, be successful, learn your trade, and then you're made. You would never want for a job in this industry moving forwards, because people would just. I mean, Jess, she'll have been at Salesforce for. Well, she's been there 18 months. She had a baby recently. She's going back. She'll never have to be concerned about working in this industry again, because whoever looks at it will go, 2, 3, 4 years at Salesforce. She's got to be worth talking to. And again, what do you want? You want the interview, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And my last question, so look, really appreciate your time today. So I've got one final question to end the podcast. What would be the one piece of advice you'd either give a contributor or a manager looking to make a name for themselves in our industry?
I think today you would give something back. I mean, I was selfish and myopic in some respects up until, I don't know, probably the last 5 or 6 years. I wasn't interested in anything else. And I think there's a tendency that you know, it's a generational thing and all sorts of things, but that's the way that it was. But I think in this day and age, in the sharing economy and in the whole social piece, you want to give back. You want to be there to help and support people without it necessarily everything being a penny. I get daily people offering me stuff to recommend their products to the clients and all this sort of business, and you say, well, my attitude is unless it's 50 grand, it ain't worth the bother. Tuppence here and tuppence there, or I'll pay you 2% and all of that. I'll do it for nothing. If you want to sit down and listen to what I've got to say, I'll sit down and do it, and then you go off and do it. Don't argue with me, because that gets hard. But and that's the way it is. And I say this to most of the people that I meet. If you've got an issue, or I know somebody that might be able to help you, just give me a shout. The worst that could happen is I can't answer the phone because I'm too busy. But that being able to connect people or point people in the right direction or put people together that do business is actually quite satisfying, and it's more satisfying that I then haven't got to go around chasing for a £5 because they've told me they're going to pay me. But it's surprising how people are reticent to do it because they always think there's some kind of hidden agenda.
Or there's no instant reward either. They might not get back something straight away. We're in a now culture, aren't we? If we're not getting something now, we're disappointed.
But that's it. I recently became a fellow of the Institute of Sales Management, and I'm signed up to their mentoring scheme, and I get a kick out of it. But I think all the way down the track, it doesn't matter where you are in the stack. There's always something you can do for somebody else, and I think if you can get financial reward for everything you do out of your head, then it's very satisfying.
Great. Paul, you've been a great guest. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us and listening to another episode of our Channel Chat podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard and are listening on iTunes, please could you give us a review and subscribe in order to get the newest episodes as soon as they're released. Otherwise, as always, we release an episode every Thursday at midday, so hopefully you can join us then.